through the preservation and protection of buildings, sites, structures, and areas of historic significance and interest, through the preservation and enhancement of local historic, architectural, archaeological, and aesthetic heritage found in the city, through the maintenance of the distinctive character of the city's historic districts, and through the promotion and enhancement of the city's historic and aesthetic attraction to tourists and visitors. At this point, we'd like to ask our other commissioners to introduce themselves, and this evening we'll start from my right and the audience left.
Kamala DeBartolabel.
James Long.
Carol King.
Keelan Adams.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction of our other members. And we'd like to get started here. And first, we'd like to entertain the adoption of the minutes of the May 14th meeting. The chair will now entertain a motion for the adoption of those minutes.
Move that the minutes of the May 14th, 2024 meeting be adopted.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, any unreadiness? All those in favor, let it be known by a show of hands. Motion carried. Thank you very much. At this point, we'd like to ask our representative from the Land Use Division, Mr. Shaun Rose, to make his presentation on Cloverdale Idlewild.
Good evening, everyone. The next of our 2024 Historic Neighborhood Spotlights is on Cloverdale Idlewild. This is Montgomery's most recently designated historic district as of 2001. This neighborhood is an offshoot of the popular Old Cloverdale area, with both districts, Old Cloverdale and Cloverdale Idlewild, sharing a mature tree canopy and largely wooded character. While Old Cloverdale is laid out on curvilinear streets using Frederick Law Olmsted-esque design principles, Cloverdale Idlewild features more of a regular grid-like pattern, except for a few unusual features such as Maston Lane, Idlewild Court, and the hourglass-like intersecting Cloverdale and DuPont/Audubon roads. Nevertheless, Cloverdale Idlewild shares in Old Cloverdale's architectural diversity, featuring craftsman-style bungalows and colonial or Georgian revival-style cottages, as well as houses in the Tudor revival and minimal traditional styles. The boundaries of the neighborhood span north to south from East Fairview Avenue to Edgemont Avenue, and east-west between Audubon Road and Norman Bridge Road. The area now known as Cloverdale Idlewild was originally purchased in part by John Gendrat, he was the mayor of Montgomery between 1824 and 34. He purchased this area in 1817 at a land sale in Milledgeville, Georgia, and in part by Asa Carter, who later purchased part of the area in 1843. These are some of the old plat maps on the screen here that you can see. The 160 acres was situated south of Graham's Woods, which became part of Old Cloverdale, and it was later sold in full to Peter B. Maston, who built a homestead just south of what is now Fairview Avenue, and he named the entry Maston Lane. After Maston's death in 1865, his land holdings would remain intact until 1871, when they were divided among his widow, Mary Maston, and his 6 children and their families. After Mrs. Maston's death, the Maston home place, aka Fairview, of 40 acres was sold in 1922, and other plats were sold to investors as well. By 1937, the area's development as a neighborhood was inevitable, as the city of Montgomery was expanding southward and had 10 years earlier annexed Old Cloverdale into the city. Cloverdale Idlewild, once the site of a 160-acre plantation, was subsequently platted in the early to mid 20th century, approximately between 1937 and the post-World War II era, as a residential neighborhood. Indeed, its character is that of a mid-20th century automobile suburb. Several distinct developments are now considered a single neighborhood. These include the Cedars on the western portion, which encompassed Lexington Road from Fairview down to Edgemont, South Cloverdale Heights on the eastern side, along Montezuma and Cloverdale Roads, and encompassing Wellington Road just south of the Maston Home Place. There was also Fairview Homes for that encompassed a small area between Fairview Avenue and Ponce de Leon. Residential building began as the population grew in the pre-World War II era. Designer William Jeffers adapted pattern book floor plans for this construction, which expanded until the neighborhood approached Edgewood to the east and Huntingdon College to the north. Today, Cloverdale Idlewild is a thriving historic district in Montgomery. There are approximately 450 properties and 850 residents within the neighborhood. The Cloverdale Idlewild Association promotes and coordinates community gatherings, establishes communication among members and residents, and keeps residents informed of civic and legal developments affecting property use, among other things. The Five Points Cloverdale Entertainment District is just north of Cloverdale Idlewild, providing plenty of fun opportunities and activities for residents. There's also a public park within the neighborhood, and the tree canopy is protected by the city's historic preservation ordinance. So that's all I have for remarks here. You can see just a couple of photographs of residences within the neighborhood, and did want to give credit to some of my sources, including the Cloverdale Idlewild Association website, an historic summary written by my predecessor, Christy Anderson, and a book, Montgomery's Historic Neighborhoods, by Carol King and Karen Pell.
Okay, thank you very much. To our other commissioners, do you have any question or comments you'd like to make regarding this report? Any question or comments? Okay, let me just ask, what is it you feel that people should take away from this presentation on Cloverdale Idlewild? What was most outstanding for you when you began your investigation of that area?
Yeah, for me, it was just the fact that the area was platted as sort of separate neighborhoods or like developments, and but then it sort of coalesced together as one neighborhood. That was the most interesting thing for me as I was reading into the history of the area. But then, yeah, other than that would be the fact that it was like one large plantation site is kind of interesting, and the photo that I included on the agenda as well, showing the Maston Home Place. Yeah, I just think that's interesting to see where now it's like a street with several different houses, but at one time it was this large plantation house.
Right, thank you. Do we have anyone here this evening from Cloverdale Idlewild? Anyone? Okay, no one from that neighborhood. Oh, yes. Sir, would you like to come to the microphone and make a couple of comments, points of observation? Yes, could you come to the microphone so we can all hear you? Mm-hmm. And give us your name first.
My name is William Flowers, Trey Flowers. I think I'm next on your agenda with the city, but I've lived in Cloverdale Idlewild for the last 20 years. Originally on Audubon Road, the first stretch there by the hourglass of the park, towards the dead end, in between the two ditches. And then, 13 years ago, when we were having our first child, we moved about 50 yards on the other side of the ditch to the Cloverdale Road side. We're about 3 houses down from the large grassy area, the large park without gazebo, and have really enjoyed being there. It's a great place to raise a family. The park was 200 yards from my house. We have really enjoyed it. It's been a wonderful experience, and I'm looking forward to the entertainment district getting revitalized, and glad that's finally beginning to happen.
Sure. Thank you very much. Let me just make this one point in terms of a question. Mr. Trey, let me just ask you, come back to the microphone just 1 minute. Let's talk about Cloverdale Idlewild for just 1 minute. give us one point of attraction. You mentioned rearing a family there. What is it, as far as you're concerned, that is most outstanding about the neighborhood?
For me, my favorite thing about the neighborhood is that it does not have a monolithic sort of socioeconomic veil upon it. Not every house is not $300,000. Every house is not, every house next to each one can go be $1 million home or a $150,000 home. So it has apartments interspersed throughout there. It is a community that is not determined by the economical sort of flatness like so many new subdivisions are, where every home is between $250,000 and $350,000. So you have a community of people from all walks of life, all creeds, all financial places within the spectrum. We have judges, we have lawyers, we have, the folks that work in the restaurants right down the street. So we have a very tight-knit, connected community that also has a lot of different ages in it. We have a lot of older people, we have a lot of younger people starting families. It has sort of an idealistic approach to what community can be that is hard to create in other geographical locations.
Okay, before you take your seat, to our other commissioners, do you have a question or a comment you'd like to make to our speaker?
Yeah, we asked this question before of others. It's with regard to, since you lived in that area for 20 years,
Yes, sir.
is there anything about the guidelines or that ARB uses or that we uses that you find that doesn't make a whole lot of sense or we should look at or review in our deliberations? Anything you run into?
No, not per se. The next topic is sidewalks, and we don't have any sidewalks in there, so. But
We'll see.
The palette, the color palette is broad. There's a lot of options there. I think maybe on the other side of the street in Cloverdale that might be a little more controlled, but the painting options, I'm trying to think. We lost a pecan tree. It was nothing more than the pecan tree was dead. We took a picture and sent it in. They let us cut it down. So personally, I've had no struggle with that. And in the first 10 years I lived there, I did property management in that area as well. And as long as you stayed within the color palette and, if a tree died, didn't cut a tree, the trees there are lovely, so we don't cut them down unless they're diseased. So I personally have had no trouble and can't think of anything that needs to be changed to make it easier there. No.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. As we proceed this evening, we are moving on to our award commemorative plaques to our recipients. And what I'll do, I'll call your name. If you approach the podium right here, and Mr. Shaun Rose will come and award you your plaque. And if you want to make a couple of comments after receiving the plaques, you're completely free to do so. Our first petitioner is Mr. Wendell E. Blackwell, and the property address is 20 North Capitol Parkway, formerly 14 North Capitol Parkway, and the historic district is Capitol Heights, St. Charles. Mr. Blackwell, would you please come forward? And feel free to say whatever you like after you receive your plaque.
I'd just like to say,
Speak directly to the microphone. Thank you.
I just only been here a year, and the neighborhood is a nice neighborhood. I enjoy living in the Capitol Heights neighborhood. I enjoy. I'm retired, so I enjoy sitting on my porch and watching my neighbors walk their dogs and take their walks morning and evenings. Thank you.
Thank you too, and please come back. Okay. Second, our petitioner is Mr. John Payne, the property address 728 Thorn Place, Historic District, Old Cloverdale. And please feel free to make a couple of comments after you receive your plaque.
It's my wife over there, Lynn. Part of the inspiration, she always wanted to live in an older established neighborhood, an older house. So we, I believe we're the 7th family to live at 728, and you go back in the history, it's different house number changed several times over the years. We bought it, interestingly enough, in 2013, and after about a year of trying to get it, I went through a Fannie Mae foreclosure, and we closed on it on April Fool's Day 2013. But it turned out well for us. Very thankful. We like the neighborhood. We like everything about the house. And what's good about the neighborhood, we like the trees. We like that it's a very walkable neighborhood. It seems a very friendly neighborhood. I'd like to thank God for helping us get through it. Thank my wife for all the inspiration and the suggestions on what we were working on, and just glad to be here. Thanks for all you do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as we said, please feel free to come back anytime. Second Tuesday in the month, 5:30 p.m. Next, Trudy Walker is a petitioner. The property address, 529 Felder Avenue, formerly 605 Felder Avenue, Historic District, Old Cloverdale.
Dr. Bailey, I don't think that Ms. Walker is here.
Okay.
So I will get in touch with her and arrange for her to pick up the plaque.
All right, thank you very much. So that's it for our commemorative plaque presentation for this evening. And now we're going to ask Mr. Trey Flowers if he'll come back to the microphone, and we're going to have a discussion with him. He's Director of Street Maintenance Department for the City of Montgomery.
Good evening. Thank you for having me here. I look forward to talking about some of the issues the city has and hopefully finding solutions that we can all work through together to address what is the hex pavers in the historic areas of Montgomery, and some of them outside the historic areas as well, and just the general condition that they're in and what we can and can't do, and hopefully find some solutions. So any questions that you have about them, I brought some photos. These are in the Capitol Heights area here. These are actually in pretty decent shape, but you know, they aren't as nice as they could be. And we don't have, the city, really the means or the labor pool or the expertise to do much more with them, particularly, you know, with the grass and stuff growing up. We have that as the homeowner's responsibility because they're supposed to cut and keep to the curb. But if you can just run through them, please, if you like. These are some of the worst ones here. This is in Capitol Heights as well. If you would, please. If you would, please. Thank you. Now we're getting into the Highland Avenue area in that neighborhood, and just the general disrepair that they're in. And so we get calls pretty regularly from homeowners about trip hazards and not being able to traverse the area that they're trying to get through, and they ask us to put in concrete. We're in historical areas, and we have mistakenly done that once, and we apologize for that, for not coming to you, but we want to find a way to work forward that's more efficient on how we can and can't take care of them. So any questions that you have, please let me know.
Do you have a sense of what other cities with historic districts do about this? Do they put in more modern materials, or do they require them to fix it up the old way?
There's been quite a few things. We've done some research with the land use department, and feel free to jump in if I get off the script. But in some places, what's been done is sections of that material has been redone, designated, signage put as this is the original, sidewalk that was placed here in 1883. This is an example of it. But because of the upkeep and its lack of compliance with ADHA compliance and just lack of safety and the liability on the cities, they have done away with large sections of it, or entombed sections of it and highlighted it, used it as sort of a highlighted area, but not the actual structure for the sidewalks all throughout the neighborhood. So like places like Old Alabama Town, they have some there and they're maintained, but in places in the city where home ownership isn't as prevalent as it used to be in that area, and they're not being maintained by the homeowners, in some of the cities that they have been swapped out with, common modern materials, yes.
Mr. Long, also Montgomery is somewhat unique in that these hex blocks were made by a firm that had been in Montgomery and made monuments since the 1870s. The Clapp, it's called OA Clapp and Works or whatever, and so a lot of the monuments that you see at Oakwood, old Oakwood, were actually made by this before. And then when the time frame these neighborhoods began to develop, Mr. Clapp got the contract, and so was actually, that's why you see them in Highland Avenue, all up and down Highland Avenue, where there are they don't have that many other than Highland Avenue itself, I don't think. There are all over Capitol Heights because he lived on Capitol Parkway and actually built himself a concrete house, which still stands. He also sold smaller versions of these hex blocks to a lot of the neighborhoods in Capitol Heights and the Garden District for their front porches. So a lot of the houses you'll see have, the front porches are, instead of wood or whatever, they have the little small ones as well as their walk approach. So it was kind of a package deal, and he was the man, or at the firm, and had a very good reputation. So, and Montgomery developers were buying local. Even at that time, they were very progressive. So, well, my question is, having 100 feet of hex block in front of my house, when the roots of a tree pull one up, there's just this small portion of the hex block that pops up. If you were to take it all up and pour a concrete slab, you'd have a big old section that's stuck up. So I'm not sold on the fact that they're more dangerous than slabs, if that makes any sense. But that's why I keep mine.
Absolutely. And, the city has 3, sometimes 3.5, 4 concrete crews, and I will say we're all over the city with what you just described. Older slab poured, flat laid concrete sidewalks where trees have busted them up, and they're obviously trip hazards as well. So
it just looks to me like it's easier to fix a hex pop up than it is a big old slab.
Well, there's a skill and there's a labor cost to the hex that each one has to be handled, hand relayed and redone, where with the sidewalks, we are able to use mechanization, machinery, equipment. We come with the backhoe pretty quick, scoop it out, frame it up, put it back in the next day.
Oh, we watched it.
It goes pretty quick. Yes,
and that is why we had been so aggressive about it being in design guidelines before that too. And there was an understanding of protection, just like Shaun talked about the canopy for Bottom Park. Is that a written thing? Are they still in the guidelines for ARB? Design review, canopies and sidewalks, or did that kind of disappear at some point? Does that make sense?
I think we understand the issues to be skilled labor to do the work, the time and the cost to do the work, sourcing original materials if you're going to start restoring sidewalks, and balancing the cost of all of that against accessibility issues, trip hazards, the city being sued, and the other issues that we have. Our intent is to try and find a way forward that everyone can live with, because let's face it, some of the sidewalks that were shown up here, the cost to actually recreate these hexagonal pavers to restore an entire sidewalk is going to be expensive.
Right.
So our question is, how do we find a way forward? Because we could also be in the situation that sidewalk repairs are required, it goes to the ARB, the ARB denies replacement of the hex pavers or the repair,
Yeah,
and then a month later someone trips, breaks a
liability.
bone, sues the city.
right.
I've gone through this sort of similar situation in other cities where there is this balancing of historic preservation, cost, and safety. And I think what we need to do is try and between the residents and the city and the boards, both yourself and the ARB, is determine how we are going to address this moving forward. Are we going to save everything and try and restore everything? Are we going to be selective? Is everything going to have to be reviewed by the ARB, or can some of the decisions be left up to staff? I do believe that you know, Mr. Flowers is open to working with us and
that's great.
you know, doing
Yeah.
what we can. Are there appropriate alternatives in some areas? So in other words, where the sidewalk is pretty much, you know, 70–80% gone, is it acceptable to possibly pour concrete and stamp it there to
Right.
give the impression and take those original few remaining pavers and use them somewhere else for repairs? And I think this is what we need to establish. And we do know a survey was done, and we think it was back 2014. We think that's when you
Yeah,
were talking
we did
about.
that, yeah.
We, you know, it would be helpful to know that how far did that process go, and were there any, like, where are we taking this up from after what happened in 2014? So I think it would be helpful to hear if back then were any recommendations made, were any potential solutions discussed. You know, where did that finish up? What was the upshot of that?
Well, one of the things that I know, and Laura may correct me on this, when we had a sympathetic maintenance department, they did do a couple of runs, and I think it was in the Garden District, but I couldn't really tell you. They did pour slabs in Stampton. But, you know, and I couldn't tell you exactly where. Do you know where they might be, Laura? Okay. There was a committee, and we divided up the different neighborhoods and took the most high-profile streets.
Yeah, I was not involved with the GDPA at that time, but I do know that we have a stretch of stamped concrete that runs on South Lawrence Street, north of Noble.
Okay, toward the interstate. Okay.
And
So-
was that supported by the neighbourhood, or how deteriorated was the, like, what led to concrete being poured and stamped?
Well, a lot of Lawrence Street has been poured with flat concrete. That was the last time the gas company came through replacing gas lines before they became Spire. This was when it was still Alabama Gas Company or Alagasco. And again, I was not involved, but my understanding is that some people on the GDPA board were in favor of doing something that would provide more safety with the poured concrete, but that would still have an appearance of the hex blocks. My understanding also, although I wasn't there, is that it was quite contentious among the board members with some strong feelings on both sides.
Well, that particular area has not as many owner-occupied, too.
Yeah, this is the vacant, in front of the vacant lot behind the church that fronts onto Perry Street,
Oh, okay.
north of Noble.
Yeah, and so this same concept kind of applies to brick sidewalks.
I wasn't there.
Excuse me, ma'am, before you take your seat, would you please state your name for the record?
Sorry, Laura Calloway.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm the
Yeah, we know you.
immediate
Just as-
past president
yes.
of the Garden District Preservation
Yeah, and thank you for
Association.
coming to our meetings, too.
Oh, I
Yes.
wouldn't miss it for the world, thank you.
Like Ms. Calloway was saying, I wasn't here when that happened, but I have a little bit of history. The past Public Works Director was involved in it, and he had spoken with me about it, selling it.
Oh, okay.
It was really a test section, trying to get buy-in from the neighbor, or the Garden District Association to move towards that. He funded it, I believe, himself with a friend of his, Concreations,
Oh, yeah, right.
his buddy there, and it was contentious, you're right. It did not go over as well as he wanted it to, because he wanted to move in that direction. And I think in the Garden District, it's still contentious. I've had the current, I think, president of the Garden District mention that she was open to that, but she didn't think the rest of the board was. There's other solutions that have been applied in the Garden District. I know that Trinity Presbyterian on their lot there, but they did this themselves, not the city.
Right.
They took them up and had them encased in concrete. So they
Right. So they won't float. So I mean,
they
they'll
won't float as bad. And that's one of the issues with the city, with even redoing them. If we had the labor and the skill and the time, is they have to be reset periodically. It's not as permanent a fix. So it takes continued maintenance, and without as much homeowner buy-in, that continued maintenance keeps falling back on the city, and that is happening truthfully in all aspects.
But it is city property, though, right?
Well, it's a city easement that was, is my understanding, and I'm sure land use can correct me, I can get this wrong. It's a city easement that was dictated by city engineering when the neighborhoods were
Right, when they were platted out.
platted out for the benefit of the citizens. But you actually own that property. You pay taxes on that property to the state and county, all the way to the curb.
To the curb.
Yeah, so ownership, I would say the city has an easement, the city has a liability to make the pathways that are within the city safe for its citizens. But the ownership, the city doesn't own it. That would be my argument.
Before you take your seat, Mr. Flowers, we have some guests here in the audience. I believe they are some citizens of Montgomery, and I just want them to feel free to ask you a question before you take your seat, and you all could use the microphone over here to my right and your left if you have a question for Mr. Flowers before he takes his seat. Please feel free. He's the man to ask.
When we spoke before, I was actually with Miss Christina when we
Yes.
talked to you at the place. Is this working?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Connor Calloway, no relation that we know of. I'm the vice president of the GDPA. Most of the precedent is, yes, it is a trip hazard, and we do have a lot of people that are having some trouble walking around and getting around in the neighborhood. We're actually starting to audit them, me and the rest of, board members are basically starting to audit our roads, not only for sidewalks, but also for anything else that the city can help out with correcting, also with overgrowth, abandoned lots, the blight. We all have heard and know all about it, and it's just a detriment. As far as sidewalks, I do understand that pouring a slab of, say, sub-concrete and then putting the hex pavers back on top requires maintenance still, like Trinity did. How often does it need maintenance is my follow-up question. Because your current pavers you did in front of my house, which your team did, and they're beautiful, but even after about, when was that, a year ago? Even after a year with the wash and everything else going on, they're starting to go uneven again, as they would do because of tree roots and sand and stuff like that. But that is, I know that I would probably have to request them to be fixed in about another 3 years or so, should I wish to. So if we poured a slab of sub-concrete and then put the pavers back on top, encasing them in, encase them in concrete, we're just setting it on top with another divider. How long in between do you think maintenance would be needed then?
I would have to look at it to give you a really good answer, because there's so many variables. We talked about the tree roots earlier. The tree roots will break
Buckle
it
it
up,
still.
and it'll crack it. But
Still do it.
it depends on the subsoil. It depends on the tree roots that are there. What has happened is, over the
Directly to the mic,
close
please.
to 100, what's happened in over closer to 100 years is they have been pulled up and put back down. And when that happens, because they're tree roots, the prevailing thought, particularly now, is not to cut out the tree roots, but to add more sand on top of it. Well, as they rise up, they don't have the border of the lawn and or the rest of the dirt around them, and as it settles back out, the ends fall off, the sides fall off. They stay pretty stable, long ways. It's the ends, and it's because we've added so much sand to handle the roots that it comes up. Concrete does better with the roots, but it depends on the trees. If you have a live oak tree, like Capitol Heights has plenty of live oaks.
Yeah,
There's nothing you
you're
can
in
do
trouble.
there.
There's nothing, yeah, it's not gonna take you, whether it's concrete or brick
Yeah,
or hex blocks,
yeah.
it's gonna pop right back up
Yeah, the
again.
live oaks are, I think they're beautiful. My neighborhood's full of them, but they are definitely a hazard just in their own rights. We have problems with them in the parks, and people trip and fall in the parks and try to sue the city because the roots, by their nature, come to the top and grow out. So it really would depend on what's around that area where you are. Like I said, the Trinity Presbyterian did theirs themselves. They did a really good job. They poured a concrete border to hold them in place and then placed them in concrete. But they have, even, I guess, what is that, on the Felder side, it kicks up around that large tree that's to the left of the stairs going in.
But it would if it were a concrete slab too. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just gonna push up whatever's sitting on top of it, yeah.
Yes.
So I guess a follow-up question would be, occasionally we will have an oak tree messing up the road. I know that's a completely different topic. And I know sometimes we have oak trees growing where we prefer probably, I can never pronounce them right. Is it crank myrtle? Is that how you pronounce them?
Crepe myrtles.
I'm always bad at that tree. I guess it's because I have a personal vendetta against that tree from long ago. Not now. I love the ones in front of my yard. But any oak trees growing in that area, is there any possibility of a tree audit to possibly eliminate those giant trees from areas where they don't grow well? I'm not talking about my beautiful oak tree that's in front of my house that is good, 15, 20 feet back, maybe? But literally ones right beside the sidewalks that are also growing into power lines and causing harm like that as well. Has there been any thought about that? I know it can be difficult to do or to consider.
It is difficult to do. The canopy in that area and in the historical areas are all protected under the ARB, and that's one of the things that we're trying to work out here is how we honor and respect the historical essence of the areas, but still make them functional for our modern times. This is hopefully the beginning of that conversation. But the city has a city arborist.
Urban forester.
Urban forester,
Yeah.
who can look at that, and just lives ago, the majority of those live oaks, once they get bigger than about that, they have hollow voids in them. That doesn't mean they're not healthy, but once they get really big, they become a danger, and it's under my purview is also the tree gang. So we are tasked with keeping the roads open. We haven't had a major storm in this town in a long time. Our canopy is very overgrown, it's very mature, it's very heavy. The next time we do have a storm, it's going to be bad, and a lot of those hollow trees are what are going to be.
It's true.
Yeah, are going to be what causes a lot of damage. So I would recommend having the urban forester come out and look at it. His name is Orem Snow. He's a very nice young man, and he can assess it for you and make a recommendation. But I'm sure that before you have it cut, or he recommends it cutting down, or if it's that close to the street, we're asked to cut it down, it would have to come before the ARB.
And especially they are protected. If you're in the garden district, they are protected, and most licensed tree contractors and arborists are required to get certain permits, and they know ARB's watching them. They know that if it's, they're not going to just come out and chop it down without some kind of.
That's right. I know that quite thoroughly, actually. With a very large oak between my house and my other house, and as much as we love architecture, the next big storm, one of our houses is going to be removed from history. That all being said, is the arborist, the ARB, street maintenance, and historical district going to try and work together and see what trees need to be removed in order to maintain safety and historical? Is that in the works?
Well, the code allows trees which are dead or dangerous to actually be removed without going to the ARB, but ultimately it would be the forester that would make that call. Otherwise, you would have to go to the ARB to ask for permission. We recently lost our urban forester. He left for another job. So Orem is basically at the moment doing the work of to people. So I would say if it's a concern to reach out to him as soon as possible, because he's obviously not going to be able to do it the next day. But that's certainly the best information to speak to Orem, you know, and get him to stop by and have a look at it and you know, discuss it with him. That's your best bet.
But I'm not talking for me, and I've met Mr. Warm. He's a very nice gentleman. I'm talking about for this.
Well, for this here, believe it or not, we actually, I mentioned earlier in joking, well, maybe it's either the trees or the pavers, and I said I don't fancy being in the middle of that argument, but I think we do have to accept that, you know, the tree canopy is incredibly important to the city for a number of reasons. And we are actively trying to plant more trees. In fact, we just got $1 million grant to plant a substantial amount of more trees. And we are aware that the more trees we plant, the more maintenance is going to be required, not just for the trees, but for the sidewalks and the roads and everything else. And unfortunately, in historic preservation and in, you know, our section here, we oversee urban forestry as well. We have all these things to balance, and this is really an opening discussion on where did the discussion on the sidewalks get to before, and how do we want to address it into the future? And it's really something which everything has to be considered, and we do need to come up with a way forward that is going to be affordable, that is going to be safe, that we have the manpower to do, that requires hopefully as little maintenance as possible, appropriate substitutes. Are we looking at a long-term plan? You know, should we be looking over the next 10 years? Do we try and get funding for the sidewalks? Is it a case of we pick and choose what areas we really want to protect, but you know, we need to treat everyone fairly? We don't want to be saying, well, we'll protect the sidewalks in this neighbourhood but not this one. And it really is a very complex issue that goes just beyond, you know, repairing sidewalks.
Right.
There's a whole lot to think about, and this is really just the opening discussion. I mean, we don't necessarily want to cut the ARB's time also every time 2 hexagonal pavers need replaced. We need to come up with a process that works for everyone and that gives the most overall benefit. And this is really why we're bringing it to you just now. What do the neighbourhoods want to see? What do the residents want to see? What do the boards want to see? What does street maintenance want to see? And we're really trying to come up with something that probably isn't going to please everyone, but at least is something attainable and affordable and safe, and you know, with historic preservation at the forefront. And this is really why we're bringing this to you and opening up the discussion to hear ideas and see what the way forward is. It's real easy to just say, no, they all have to be maintained, the missing sidewalks have to be restored, but there's not much point in doing that if all of a sudden you're at a $15 million budget, because it's never going to get anywhere. We need something that works for everyone. You know, and Trey did say that one option may be to bring in a specialist company to do this work, but then you're adding to the cost, then you're adding to the time, then you may not be able to do all the sidewalks in 1 year. You may have to say, well, maybe over 5 years we can do it, but we can't do it now. Then you're leaving yourself open to accessibility issues, tripping hazards, you know. So that's really why this has been opened up, to get that discussion going and to allow everyone to have their input. And we're not saying it has to be resolved tonight. This is just the opening discussion to see where we might go from here.
I think that's are we against the idea of running a stamp along the concrete? That's a little bit more elaboration I would say on that one, and I do know the trees will still possibly wreck it, and that's the bigger picture, but is there any aversion to attempting that as well if the neighborhood's decided that might be the path they want to try?
No, there's no aversion to it. It'll, you know, have some accompanying cost. I don't have concrete stamping skills in my concrete crews right now. We would have to,
find some places we were willing to try it, we would have to buy the stamps. We would have to, develop that skill, so it would take a moment. Or if there's, if we came to a standard, if people wanted to replace what's in front of their house because it's not functioning with that themselves, we would need to have guidelines and standards as to what that would look like, so that our stamped concrete that we do ties in with the guy who buys and redevelops a piece of property and does it from the curb back and wants to put in his own. I think there's a couple of places on Court where that's been done as well. We were talking about stamped concrete a little bit further down on Court near Fairview. I believe there's some there as well that a private person does, private homeowner. So as long as we had some guidelines that it was the same, I think it could work.
Anything extra?
The one thing that I would suggest that y'all think about in the course of this process, we have some streets like Winthrop Court, that's the street that I live on. The majority of that is still hex blocks. It would be nice if all we can do is pick out a few places and keep them completely historic, completely authentic. That would be better, I think, than nothing. We have a street like South Perry that a lot of that has already been poured, especially from Felder all the way up to Fairview. We've lost most of the hex blocks there. I think there's still hex blocks north from Felder. But if we have to, if we could pick out some places that would stay authentic and that the city would commit to doing whatever's necessary to keep them authentic, and then look at some solutions that would be agreeable for other areas that would give the appropriate look without every street in every historic neighborhood having to be 100% authentic.
And that was one of the things we had discussed. Again, we didn't know if that would be acceptable to the residents, but somewhere like Capitol Heights, where there has been a lot of loss, does it make sense to take what can be salvaged and maybe do one block and possibly put a sign up saying these are the original pavers that were on the street, and the entire sidewalk used to look like this, and the rest would perhaps be stamped. But again, in terms of historic preservation, do you really want to be doing that? Do you really want to be taking materials and but it was considered. Maybe we just focus on the best examples in each historic district. But again, how do you say to some residents, no, we're removing your pavers and we're going to take them to make this sidewalk over here?
Well, and I know in Capitol Heights, and then of course Highland Park too, there are a lot of hex blocks that are not in designated areas too.
But areas,
not all, yeah.
But areas that could be, we discussed that, do we take them from non-designated areas? Well,
Or,
what happens if we decide to designate those areas in the future?
But that is also, exactly, yeah, so you're somewhat diminishing the context or, whatever. But it's also, that I know specifically in Capitol Heights, you run into property rights. Because there are a lot of people who have, fine, okay, hex blocks, but they want concrete. So there's also, you have that as well mixed in with the whole thing, as opposed to what the neighborhood or the group or the city divide. You still got that property rights thing too. Yeah.
It's like the part on North Capitol that we took up, unfortunately. It was in front of 4 houses. Every one of those homeowners, I didn't touch them until each one of them said that that's what they wanted, and it tied into a continuation of...
Were they owner-occupied houses?
Yes, ma'am. So,
No.
I believe so. I don't know if they were owned by, but
They were owned by the people, but yeah.
That spoke to the owners, but just the occupiers.
That made me think of a question about Highland Avenue. Is Highland Avenue designated or not designated?
Yeah, there's one part of Highland Avenue with like the median, that part is designated, but there is a larger neighborhood that is not.
Oh, because I noticed today we were losing a block of hex blocks from Capitol Parkway
Yeah.
east on Highland Avenue.
Highland Avenue, yeah,
Yeah,
right
they
at the very west end.
Yeah, they were pulling them, no,
They're
this
pulling
was
them up.
Capitol Parkway to whatever the next street is. Yeah, they've already done the west end of that block, and they were pulling
Right.
them up all the way
Yeah.
to
They
Capitol.
won't be doing any more on that block. But
Well, and there is a lot in Cottage Hill too. And they're very,
until we come to some solution, because there's a lot that needs to be done on that block, but there
Yeah.
won't be any more taken up and poured back until.
Okay, do we have any other question from our other commissioners? Any other commissioner has a question? Yes, go right ahead.
So my question is there a way for, how we were talking earlier, to see if certain areas can have, the maintenance done on the blocks and then, or like have the concrete laid and then other streets may not have it done a specific way as far as the hex blocks are concerned? Is there a way to where some type of committee can be established to where people can come to consensus on which ones would be done and which ones would not be done? Because I know that, there will be some qualms. I know, like we were mentioning, we can't please everyone, but will there be representatives from those neighborhood associations that'll be present to be able to determine like what happens on which section of sidewalks or whatnot in each community?
I won't be the final say on that. I think that's what this conversation is hoping to start and create. I will say on the city side, our options when we get a complaint of a trip hazard and a danger and fall, I have to shut that area down. So while we go through this process, and we're talking about subcommittee of ARB and the neighborhood association meeting, all that takes a lot of time. And my only option is to shut the sidewalk down, because we have our policy is to within 24 hours of a trip hazard to make it safe and try to fix it as fast as we can. Sometimes we have to shut things down and they linger for months shut down, because that's just where we are in the process of being able to get to that job. But if we're talking 6, 8, 12 weeks to get consensus on what we're going to do, it's going to be sections that are closed down.
Which I think that's why it's important that not necessarily every repair or alteration would have to go to the ARB. I think we should be thinking in terms of, just for instance, these are the streets that are intact, these are the ones that we're going to protect into the future. As long as any damaged or moved hexagonal pavers are reset, then they can, just be reviewed by Shaun. And these sections of streets we have agreed are too far gone to restore, therefore repairs can be done in concrete. So, that's the sort of thing that would work best. We don't want to be closing streets for a month while we schedule something for the ARB. And this is what we're asking you to think about. Right. Is there something that we can come up with that most people are happy with, that satisfies all the different requirements, that can simply be reviewed at a staff level, so that staff can work, with Trey and say, yes, that's fine, go ahead and do it. And every now and again, an issue may come up that does have to go to the ARB. And this is the difficulty. How do we make that determination? And all we're asking you to do is think about it and come back to the next meeting, or email Shaun or myself or Trey just with ideas or suggestions, and we're happy to look at them. I think the good thing is we have someone here who's willing to work with and is open to dialogue, and that's really why we opened this up.
Right. Okay.
Thank you, Trey.
Sounds good.
And just I just wanted to note that, so that we can develop an expedited review procedure for the ARB. We have a number of them, existing now. And so possibly that could be a solution, because I agree, like, we don't want to have to bring every single thing up before the board and have to wait, you know, for the board meeting and all of that. So I think that that's a way that we can direct the ongoing dialogue toward having, you know, a set of standards and, you know, what are we looking for and what would be acceptable, and to codify it into an expedited procedure.
So that it gets passed down from tray to tray to tray, that kind of thing, and respected within the department.
Mr. Flowers, I want to thank you for taking time from your busy schedule to stop by here this evening. What is a good number for a person to call if a person wanted to actually speak with you? What's a good number?
My desk number at the city lot is 625-625-2999.
Okay. For people who are watching this broadcast this evening, because we are broadcasting live, and for people who see it on a delayed basis, we just want them to know that you are a person who believes in getting the job done. And thank you so much. I'm serious about coming out here this evening, and please come back.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you. Moving right along, let's look at Section 3 of the draft revised ARB design guidelines. And Shaun, you want to take the lead on this? And what we want to hear, what heartburns do you have about this revised guidelines? That's what we want to hear from you this evening.
Sure. So this section is on building exteriors. So we're looking at wood, masonry, architectural metals, paint and paint colors, roofs, etc. So I really would classify this as like sort of the main body of the design guidelines. And so, you know, they are fairly complete or thorough, you know, so if really it's just an opportunity for you all to provide comments or ask any questions if you have any input.
Okay, questions?
Well, my question has to do with how these guidelines, particularly this exterior, are going to be used. Is it going to be something that the staff will look at and make a decision on rather than the board? My particular question has to deal with, there are a lot of sections in here where it has the language, quote, "it is not appropriate," end quote.
Okay.
And then it says to do something or not do something. What does that mean? Does that mean that's something that the staff can say, all right, it's not appropriate, we're not approving it?
Yeah, so there are, that's what I was mentioning a moment ago, is that there are a number of expedited review procedures that staff look at that are adopted by the ARB. But what these are primarily for the ARB members to look at proposals that come in. Our current guidelines are very outdated, so we are, you know, very eager to get these updated, hopefully by the end of this year. And this has been an ongoing process from what I saw in my records, going back to like 08 or 09. So it's been sort of ongoing, and just never been able to cross the finish line. So when it's saying, you know, it is not appropriate, that's really for the board members to have that sort of red flag. If there's something that's being proposed and it falls under that category, you know, then they may want to consider denying an application if that's the case.
So it's just a consideration under the guidelines. They can still approve it even though it may say it's not an appropriate thing for that particular exterior? Yeah,
the board, you know, they can come to a consensus and approve something that it may say is not appropriate in the guidelines, but these are really the sort of best practices, and that's my understanding that they were drafted based on the Secretary of Interior standards for historic preservation. So that's where the language is coming from primarily.
And I think it's important to point out that, as Shaun said, they're based on the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. These standards are classed as the standards for rehabilitation because they accept that over time changes may be made to historic buildings. So this set of design guidelines is really a sort of ideal, in an ideal world, in an ideal situation, this is how you would carry out the rehabilitation. But they are guidelines, they are not law, and that's the difference between the code and guidelines. Guidelines are advisory, they're not law, and so an ideal rehabilitation project would follow these guidelines, but in certain circumstances these guidelines have to be, you have to veer away from them, and that is where the ARB would make the decision. In other words, removing wood frame windows and putting in metal frame windows is not the ideal way of doing things, but it's a sort of accepted method for the longevity of the house and making it workable, especially if your windows are deteriorated. And especially in Florida, where I came from, because of hurricanes, it was accepted that, you know, impact windows were okay, even though they maybe didn't completely conform to the guidelines. And so the guidelines are there, as Shaun said, for a sort of best practice, but the ARB can deviate from them if there is sufficient reason for doing so.
So would the idea be on your summary would point out that you recommend an approval of whatever, even though it doesn't meet that particular guideline, that it would be specifically addressed in your summary, that it's not an appropriate?
Well, yes, when a report goes to the ARB, Shaun will make a recommendation. He will point out things that don't necessarily conform to the guidelines. So in other words, say someone has a wood frame house and it has wood siding on it, and the whole side of the house has deteriorated. I mean, ideally what you want to do is put exactly the same type of siding back with a similar profile. Now, maybe the homeowner can't find that siding, maybe it is a slightly different profile, and depending on where it is on the house, is it visible from the right-of-way, maybe it would be okay to use a different profile if it wasn't automatically noticeable. On the other hand, someone may come in and say, I can't afford wood siding, I can't find it anywhere, I want to use hardy board that looks similar to the wood siding. Would the ARB be okay with that? The ARB might be, they might not be. On the other hand, someone may come in and say, I want to replace all of my siding with aluminum siding, and we would then obviously say, hang on a minute, you're going to remove all the wood siding off your house and put aluminum on? That is definitely not appropriate. We are definitely not recommending that. So a lot of it depends on what is being replaced, what is available to replace it with, where it's located in the historic structure, how easy is it to get. So all of that has to be weighed up, because the ultimate point is to make sure that historic properties are usable, livable, workable, and the changes that you make are appropriate for the property. And that's where these guidelines allow that flexibility for the ARB.
I agree with that, but it needs to be out in the open a little bit more, that's an issue, but we decided this. Because I've seen it just since I've been on here, that some things seem to go through, and some things don't, some houses get approved and some don't get approved with the same issues. And it just needs to be a little bit more open, that yeah, we considered this, but we decided this, and that clearly is out there, so me as a commissioner, that we all know what we're doing.
Sure.
And not stuff is being, I don't say it's being slipped through, but it's an open process.
Sure, and we are certainly considering, amending our staff reports so that recommendations are from Shaun are clearer, and that if a board is going to make a decision, especially if there's a chance they're going to set some sort of precedent, we want to absolutely describe on the record as to why they're coming to that decision.
Now, I would also add that I think that this set of draft guidelines, once we can get them to a finished phase and get them adopted by the ARB, will tremendously help with that issue that you brought up, because the old guidelines are just not very well documented, not very well detailed. It's like less than 30 pages long, whereas this document, I believe, is over 100 pages so far. So it is much more thorough, much more detailed, and I believe that it will help with making things more consistent across the board, because it does have all of these, very detailed scenarios and guidelines for the board members to be able to use. So I would just add that.
I think you've done a fabulous job in each, I don't want to say genre, but each area where you give a little synopsis or whatever, and then you get into the planning, how you plan, how do you look at your project and how do you make the best decisions, and then your actual, how it fits into the plan actually fits into your guidelines. So that, and I think it's to note also that this is, the Secretary of Interior standards are national, if not internationally based criteria that the rest of the world operates on. But you've also given reasons why, like not to do this and not to do that. You've really validated your suggestions and the route that you suggest for people to take. So I think it's a great document.
What's our next step? Where do we go from here?
It's got more sections.
Yeah, I think, we appreciate your comments. I've been taking notes. And yeah, so the next, I've just been sort of moving along each month. So next month we'll look at section 4. If I can get to the page here, I have the topic. That's going to be additions and new construction. So you can look forward to that on the next agenda. And that'll be the next section. I believe it's section 4, and then one more, section 5, and then appendices. So those should be the last 3 sections that we'll put on the agendas and request comments. And I'll be finalizing. There's still a little bit more that I have to do to take photographs and clean up a few things that are still just not finished. So I'll be working on that. And intending on getting these adopted hopefully by the end of the year.
And it's important to note it's actually the HPC that adopt these guidelines, even though it's the ARB that use them. So we are taking these sections to the ARB as well as a courtesy, and we're bringing them section by section rather than giving you a 100-page document and saying, please review this and bring your comments to the next meeting. So ultimately, once the document is completed and once other changes are made, you will be presented with the final document, which will be up to you guys to adopt, make changes to. So that's why they're being brought in sections, so you don't get overloaded in one go.
Okay. As we close this afternoon, let me just ask our other commissioners, do you have any comments? Got anything coming up you'd like to bring to our attention? Any event coming up you'd like to bring to our attention? Okay. Anything from you all that you'd like to bring to our attention? Any updates?
Yeah, that's Warren reminded me. So we recently finished the architectural survey for the South Hall neighborhood. We had a couple of public meetings to inform people about, what historic designation means, what kind of rules would be involved with it. And so now I will be drafting state inventory site forms for each residence, as well as a designation report. So again, hopefully by the end of the year, possibly pushing into early next year, we'll be looking to bring the designation report before this board to have you all consider. And that would be basically you all would consider the report and then make a recommendation, which will go to City Council. And then council would be the ones to make the final action by ordinance as far as designating South Hall as a new historic district.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anything else from anybody before we leave? Let me just say I hope everybody has a good Father's Day coming from the Historic Preservation Commission. We're wishing you a happy Father's Day, and I hope happy 4th of July. And we'll see you back here on July 9 at 5:30 p.m. This meeting is hereby adjourned.